Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I recorded a video. It's been a couple weeks. I'm really excited to be back. If you are new to the channel, welcome to the channel. Thank you for finding me. If you feel like subscribing, give us a comment, thumbs up, all that fun stuff. It would be much appreciated. Just to let you know, I have the windows open today in the study. I record in a study. It's kind of a glass box. As you can see, there's windows everywhere. And I'm trying to show you one of the windows, but I can't reach the shade. It's that one all the way back there. But anyway, it's really hot in here today. So I got all the windows open so I get a cross breeze. And that means you can hear all of the birds because I record right next to an aviary. Let's jump right into this. What are we talking about today? Hell yes. So I'm very late in recording this video and I feel bad about it. People have been asking me about it and I loved this release. I love this movie. This is Dreadnought. This is Eureka Entertainment. This came out at the end of April, I believe April 25th of 2022. This is a film that was directed by Yuen and it stars Yuen, who you can see right here, and Beardy is in it, and Kwon Tak-hing is in it, and Lily Lee is in it, and the cast is just enormous in this film. Mei Sheng Fan is in it, who is, I believe, Louis Fan's dad, and who's in like the story of Ricky. He's in like everything. You'll recognize him for sure. And then Yoon Shun Lee is in it. Philip Ko is in it. It's just got an amazing cast. And so if you're just here for like a quick hit in a nutshell, what did I think about it? So I had never seen this film. I thought I had seen it before because I've seen the end fight like in full a couple different times. I guess I've just seen the clip on Instagram or YouTube or whatever. And I've also seen like a middle section of the film of about 10 or 15 minutes. So I really thought I had seen the whole thing and recalling those sections of the film. But I think I somehow just kind of saw clips from it. I've never actually sat down and watched the whole movie. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. This is like my, whatever highest rating you want to give it, I'll give it an A. I'll give it 5 stars. Like, it's not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the exact kind of movie that I love. This movie is just bananas. And it's kind of hard to describe because it's like 4 or 5 movies happening at the same time. So you have this Yuen sort of plays the main character. He's not really, there's like multiple main characters, but he kind of plays the main character. And so it's kind of this coming of age story about Yuen. His sister is played by Lily Lee. She runs a laundry business and one of his jobs is to go out and collect debts for her, but he's really shy. And he's very timid. And so people like bully him and he doesn't collect the money. And it's kind of and he has a good friend who's played by Beardy, who I love. I love seeing him in all these different old movies. And I learned from a different, from the Knockabout release, actually, his interview on the Knockabout release, which I have right here, that Beardy was a huge Bruce Lee fan. And that was one of the things that made him want to be in movies in the first place. And that's really obvious in Dreadnought. Like, you can almost kind of see him trying to channel Bruce Lee, and he really looks like, he doesn't have the beard, and he really looks like Bruce Lee in this movie, and it's really interesting. He's almost playing like a Bruce Lee type. And so he's Yuen buddy, and he's kind of a badass, and so he's trying to help him, like, be less timid and stuff like that, and his sister's, like, kind of encouraging him to, like, not be a wimp all the time and stuff like that. So that's one movie within this movie. Then you have a slasher movie. I'm not kidding. Like, it's like a prototypical, like, okay, in like the classic slasher movie, if you think about like the Friday the 13th movies, if you think about like Halloween, if you think about like Silent Night, Deadly Night is another one, like some traumatic thing happens to someone who is like really powerful and strong or whatever, and then they just go crazy and kill all these people, and that happens in this movie. And so it's like a slasher movie, a coming of age movie. It's kind of a comedy because you have these cops. The Mei Sheng Fan character is like the head cop, like the deputy inspector or whatever. And it's a period piece, obviously. So it has this kind of Sherlock Holmes feel of these cops in like these costumes going around trying to figure out what this mysterious crime, this killer, but they have no idea what they're doing. So it's like a comedy. It's like a bad cop comedy. It's like a making fun of bad detective stories in a way. So you have a cop movie, detective parody is what I would call it, a slasher movie, the Yuen coming of age movie, and then you also have a Kwon Tak-hing movie, or not, excuse me, a Wong Fei-hung movie. Kwon Tak-hing plays Wong Fei-hung. So if you're unfamiliar with the kind of the history of the Wong Fei-hung character in the movies, in a nutshell, the old school Wong Fei-hung movies, which I think they were making in the 30s, but definitely the 40s, the 50s, the early 60s, those movies are like some of the most influential, foundational, important martial arts films and Hong Kong films ever made. And Kwon Tak-hing played Wong Fei-hung in those films. Kwon Tak-hing, I also learned from this release, was in either the first or second ever Cantonese language movie ever made when sound film was invented. So this guy, like, you really have to think of Kwon Tak Hing as like a Cary Grant, a Katharine Hepburn, a John Wayne, like one of these types, Jimmy Stewart, like these just like larger than life towering icons of cinema. That's really kind of what he is. And he's in this movie and he plays Wong Fei-hung. And so it's like this I think he's in like his 70s in this movie, or at least his 60s. And this is kind of his like, kind of his swan song with the character. And so it's this like homage to / like ribbon on the top of whatever, icing on the cake of all these incredible Wong Fei-hung movies made over the course of decades with the original actor playing him, at the same time as it's all these other movies, and it's tonally all over the place. There's like a lion dance scene in this, which I think is probably the best lion dance scene I've ever seen in a Hong Kong movie. That's just incredible and bananas. All kinds of crazy fighting. There's like a handheld like flying guillotine type device. Like there's a character with two faces. Like it takes all these genres, all these tones. It's like horror, it's comedy, it's all this crazy stuff, and it mashes them together. And it works. Yuen Woo-ping makes it work. And a lot of people talk about how Yuen Woo-ping is weird. He has like a weird sensibility. He's kind of a strange person. And he likes weird things. And I had never really seen that in full display before. And this movie is so weird, but it works so well. You're not watching it thinking like, what the hell is going on? This movie's a mess. They didn't know what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. And what they were doing was making a batshit insane movie. And I just loved it. Like, this is exactly what I love about Hong Kong films, old school martial arts films. Like, you have no idea where this movie is going from scene to scene. You don't know what the tone's going to be. You don't know which characters you're going to encounter, which part of the journey you're going to go on from one moment to the next. But it works so well. And it all works as a complete package, despite the fact that it really is like 4 or 5 movies happening at the same time. I loved it. So that's my review of the movie in a nutshell. To talk about the release, this is the limited to 2000, so you have the slipcase here, and then you slide that up, and you get this pretty amazing poster right here. Hell yeah. And that's the back, and there is a booklet in here. And so you can reverse the cover art if you want the... Darren Wheeling did the artwork for this, as he has been doing for all these Eureka releases, and so if you want to have that, I like having that as a slipcase and then having this on the inside. And then you have the essay here, the booklet. And so the essay is actually pretty interesting. One of the things that, this is James Oliver, if I'm not mistaken, and I read the booklet and I watched the movie like right when it came out. I just have not had time to sit down and record this video. So yeah, it is James Oliver. I just wanted to make sure of that before I told you that for sure. So one of the things that I found really interesting about this booklet is that he makes the case that there are 3 Yuen Woo-ping movies starring the 3 dragons, the 3 brothers, whatever you want to call them, Yuen Biao, Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, that he thinks should be considered a trilogy because they are all connected to Wong Fei-hung, Magnificent Butcher, Drunken Master, and Dreadnought. And not like an official trilogy in the way that you would think of like Star Wars as a trilogy or whatever, but kind of like a thematically or like kind of spiritually related trilogy, if you want to think of it like that. And you could think of those 3 films as being kind of a piece together as like this kind of big sprawling 3-movie exploration of the legend of Wong Fei-hung by Yuen Woo-ping as a filmmaker. I love these too. So, and then there's there's like brief bios of Yuen Biao and Yuen Woo-ping. And one of the other things I thought was interesting about this essay is that James Oliver makes the case that you could look at this movie as a meeting point of all of the kind of trends and key figures that were happening in the martial arts film world at the time this movie was released, which again, to reiterate, in case I didn't say it, was 1981. So to go over the bonus features that are on the Blu-ray here, there's an interview with Lily Lee, which is 22 minutes long, and I'm just looking at the back here. This is 21 minutes here. Interesting. I wrote down 22 minutes. I wonder if it's like 21 and a half minutes or something like that. But anyway, she goes over her whole career. It's a really fascinating interview. The thing that I found the most interesting about this interview is she talks about what it was like to be on the sets of Shaw Brothers films, but specifically she talks about how like when they would make the sets or the costumes, the props, how they would decide what materials to use, what dimensions to use, what colors to use. Like, and I've never heard anyone really talk in detail about that before. And I thought that was really, really interesting. She talks about all the courses that she took at Shaw and how I think she learned Southern style Kung Fu at Shaw, but then when she made some other movies like this one, they wanted her to learn Northern style. So she had to learn all these different martial arts, and she didn't know anything about martial arts when she first started acting. So it was all kind of a crash course for her. And her perspective is really interesting because she goes into detail, like I said, on things that I hadn't really heard other people talk about before. Another thing that she says that I thought was really interesting is that she says that you hear a lot of people talking about Shaw Studios as though it's this giant factory of filmmaking, and what her experience was that it was actually everyone was very serious about their jobs, and they were serious about the art of making films, about the craft of making films, and they were all very serious artists, artisans, craft people, whatever you want to call them. And to her it didn't feel like an industrial process. It felt like an artistic, creative process. It just happened to be that they were making huge numbers of films all at once. And that's interesting too, because you do hear in some of these bonus features, like for instance, if you watch the bonus material on the King Boxer release that's in the Arrow Shawscope set, people will talk about how the director of that film hated working with Shaw because he felt like he was in a factory and not able to be an artist. Whereas Lily Lee says the opposite. She really felt like she was allowed to be an artist and she was working with artists. And she disagrees with that kind of label as a factory of filmmaking. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective. It was a really cool interview. And then we have 2 commentary tracks. And then before I actually dig into the commentary tracks, let me just tell you that this is 1080p presentation on Blu-ray from a brand new 2K restoration of the film. You have the original Cantonese mono audio, optional English dubbed audio with the original theatrical mix and alternate home video mix. So I'm going to assume, shout out to Brandon Bentley, but I'm not sure. Optional English subtitles newly translated for this release, and then you have trailers and the reversible sleeve. So to get into the commentaries, we have Frank Jing and Michael Worth, you know I love them together, and we have Mike and Arna, you know I love them together. Let me talk about Mike and Arna first. So Wong Jing actually came up with the idea for this movie. The movie was written by the Yuen clan, which is really Yuen Woo-ping and his brothers. They wrote the movie together, but Wong Jing came up with the story. And Mike and Arno talk a lot about Wong Jing and how it's very obvious that Wong Jing's fingerprints are all over this movie. And that was a really interesting kind of analysis to me for them to kind of walk through, like, so just so you know, obviously Mike Leader knows all these people, right? I always talk about this in these commentary tracks, or when I talk about these commentary tracks, but Mike talks about how Yuen Woo-ping is a chain smoker, which is really interesting to me for someone who's like so athletic and whose job is all about physical stuff, and that he like demands cigarettes from just random people on the sets of his movies. Like Mike Leader does not smoke, and Mike Leader started carrying cigarettes on the sets of Yuen Woo-ping movies because he would just go up to people and be like, give me a cigarette, and if they didn't have a cigarette, he'd be like, why are you here? Like, do I have to fire you? But he sounds like a really nice guy, and he's like, he'll like, well, like if he sees you on the street and recognizes you, he'll come up and just start talking to you and stuff like that. But you get a lot of insight from Mike Leader into his personality. But, you know, because Mike knows these people and because Arna knows some of them too, they're able to break down like what feels like Yuen Woo-ping's contribution and what feels like Wong Jing's contribution and stuff like that. Arna is a huge fan of horror movies, as you know. And his insight I found indispensable on this film. He talks about how the movie is obviously influenced by giallo films, which I know nothing about. My knowledge of Italian cinema is really kind of limited. I mean, obviously I've seen like the Sergio Leone movies and I've seen like Bicycle Thieves and like Rossellini and stuff like that. But Fellini is like I'm a huge Fellini fan, and I know Fellini's work really, really well. But outside of Fellini, a lot of Italian cinema is kind of a blind spot for me, especially the genre films like the police movies and the horror films. And so Arna gives a really interesting kind of overview of how the giallo films would have influenced this and how it's similar to them. Something else that Arna points out, that I'm a huge Friday the 13th fan, and I actually didn't even notice this. There's a specific scene in this movie where you know that that thing that's in all the Jason movies, right? Which is an echo, like a delay kind of effect on a voice, I think. Arna points out how they used that exact same effect in a scene in this film. It's clearly like I know, kind of pointing out, I guess, kind of homage, because if I'm not mistaken, the first Friday the 13th movie came out in 1980, and that movie was a huge hit, and so I would imagine they would have seen that film before. You know, obviously I'm not going to call Yuen Woo-ping and be like, hey, did you see the first Jason movie before you made this? But the assumption being, because they're paying homage to that sound effect, they had seen that movie and were aware of that movie, and you have a very similar kind of character here to Michael Myers and to Jason Voorhees. And I know, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the first Jason movie, but Jason is not the villain in the first Jason movie. But you get into Jason in the second movie, which I think came out in '81. They like really churned out the Friday the 13th movies. I rewatched them all just a couple years ago. I can't emphasize, like, that's my favorite horror series. I love those movies, and I've seen them all several times. But I rewatched them all in a row, maybe like 4 years ago. And I think the first like 5 or 6 all came out within like 5 or 6 years of one another. They were really like churning them out, and the first 8 all came out in the '80s. And then there started being bigger gaps between them. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked by talking about Jason. But there is what seems to be some kind of homage to the Jason films in this movie, even though this was contemporaneous with those, not something that came significantly later. So there's just a lot of analysis of stuff like that. And like there's a character in this movie, like I said, with 2 faces. And Mike and Arna kind of break that down, of the symbolism of that and how it comes from Peking opera. They talk a lot about Peking opera, which I found really interesting. I don't know too much about that. So there you go. So then Michael Wirth and Frank Zhang, I loved this commentary. I always love it. The thing I'm going to say, my favorite part of this entire commentary is both Mike and Arna and Michael Wirth and Frank Zhang talk about how there's a scene in this movie that is more or less exactly the same as a scene in Batman Forever, right? So that scene is happening, and on the commentary, Michael Wirth's like, oh, I talked to Joel Schumacher about this, who directed Batman Forever. Frank Zhang is like, really? And Michael Wirth's like, yeah, I was in Batman Forever. Like, wait, what? I'm a really big fan of the 90s Batman. Well, I guess kind of 80s, 90s, because I love the 89 one. That's my favorite Batman movie. And then Batman Returns, and like, who doesn't love Batman and Robin? Just chill. It's so good. It's so bad, but it's so good. Anyway, yeah, I thought that was kind of incredible that Michael Wirth was in Batman Forever and that he got to talk to Joel Schumacher about a scene in that film that is very clearly paying homage to Dreadnought, and that Joel Schumacher acknowledged on the set of the film, oh yeah, 100%. We're just like basically taking that scene because that scene is awesome and I love that movie. I thought that was really, really cool. But Frank goes through all of the Cantonese language stuff, the Chinese title of the film. Like it's just so much incredible context. The character with 2 faces, again, like I said, Arna and Mike talk about that. Frank again does like an analysis of what that is, why that is, the cultural context of that. Michael Wirth does a great breakdown of, there's a really amazing fight scene in this movie where Wong Fei Hung, this guy comes to measure Wong Fei Hung for a suit, but it's like a funeral suit. He's like an Undertaker assassin kind of guy, which really kind of reminds you of like spaghetti westerns, right? And they have this incredible fight scene, and where they're kind of fighting, but they're kind of not. And Michael Wirth gives a great analysis of that scene. And in general, Michael Wirth he points out how the vast majority of the fight scenes in this movie are actually disguised as something else. Like scenes of drama, dialogue, like comedy, like that kind of stuff, and how that's really interesting for someone like Yuen Woo-ping, who's so well known for fight scenes. Yuen Biao with all his abilities, and Beardy is in this film. Like all these people, Lily Lee, who are associated with martial arts films, and the vast majority of the fight scenes are really dramatic devices containing fights. They're not like those type of scenes where they're like, we're going to step outside of the plot for 15 minutes and these people are just going to have an incredible fight, right? They're all tied into, with the exception of really the final fight, which is like a big blowout. Everything is tied into a plot point. I really like that as a writer. I really appreciate the fact that they're not just throwing stuff in for the sake of throwing it in. As a fan of martial arts films, I love a good fight that comes out of nowhere and they're just beating the crap out of each other for 15 minutes. But it was a really interesting analysis by Michael Wirth, and it's really cool to think about that the way that they made the film. There's a Chinese folk song that plays over and over again in this movie that I recognized the second I heard it, and I was like, what is that song and where do I know it from? And Frank talks all about that song, so that was really cool. So I think that's basically a good review / overview of this Blu-ray. I mean, my advice to you is to just go and get it. Just buy the shit out of this. I loved this movie. I got a lot out of this release. I learned a lot about the film, about the people involved, about the cultural context of it, the historical context of it. The movie is Dreadnought. It's Eureka Entertainment. I will put a link in the description of the video to where you can go and pick this up. My name is Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. As always, I thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.